Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name is Sarita V and I run Sarita V Pinup. And I am so excited about today's video. We are going to work on making an Agent Carter dress for Halloween. And I actually got this pattern. It's the Simplicity 8050 pattern, and I got it because I really like this dress, but I got it fabric in like a print, like a floral print calico type fabric for it, and that was about 2-3 months ago. And since then I actually watched Agent Carter, and then I found this pattern and I was like, oh my gosh, they made an Agent Carter dress. And with that context, I decided that I needed to have one. So I'm actually going to make, now I know in the actual show she wore a suit set with a white blouse underneath, but I don't need a suit set. I need some dresses. So this is perfect for what I want. And I thought since Halloween was around the corner that I would make it, make Halloween my deadline. I'm not going anywhere that requires dressing up, and I think it'd just be fun to wear it to work and see if anybody thinks I'm dressed up or if it's just my normal style. So we'll find out. So anyway, so I'm gonna make that. I'll show you what I got for it. I got some blue cotton stretch fabric. This is a 97 cotton, 3% spandex. It's a royal blue color, and it's got a little bit of, just a little tiny bit of pull on it. So that'll be nice and comfortable. And I also got this white cotton stretch. It's also a 97.3 cotton spandex blend, but this one was listed as sateen. It's got a little tiny bit of a sheen if you look. It's not shiny, but a really nice smooth finish on it. So that's going to be for the collar. And then I've got my thread and my buttons. So in the pattern here, it has blue fabric covered buttons. I thought this fabric might be too thick to use covered buttons, and I don't have a button maker button cover tool, and I didn't want to buy one. So I ended up finding these. They're white, and then I also got a zipper and interfacing. So I am going to follow the pattern as closely as I can. However, I want to make one modification, and the modification is that I have two concerns with having an attached collar. The first is I can't dress it and style it with other items. So I will always be Agent Carter with this dress, and I might not always want a white collar with this dress. So what I want to do is modify this so it's just a blue dress, like a V-neck dress, and then create the white collar so it's detachable, kind of like a dickie, or maybe even snap in place. I just kind of imagine this with a really pretty kind of sheer or lacy floral collar in there, or maybe wear it with some of my tank tops underneath that are kind of thinner and would fit nicely under this dress. So I want to make the collar detachable. So that's one modification that I'm going to do. I also looked at the back. Apparently I need a zipper, so I'm not making real buttonholes, I don't think. Real buttons. I think there's a zipper under the sewed-in faux buttons, but I'm not sure. So we'll be going through the instructions and seeing how easy it is or not. It says Simplicity at the top, but we'll see how simple it is. Anyway, there's a chance that, I haven't looked at the pieces yet, there's a chance that the zipper goes on the side, but I feel like it goes in the front, like just right here under the buttons, but I can't promise you that, so we'll find out later what happens with that. So the first thing that I always have a really hard time doing, most often I deconstruct a top or skirt from a garment that already fits really well and make a pattern from that to the best of my ability. I don't always love using patterns, and I want to get better because there's some skills that I need to work on. So I want to start using patterns and making clothes that I love rather than going and buying them. So the first thing that drives me nuts on patterns is when I look on the back at the measurements and I look at my sizing. So I'm usually like a size 6, sometimes a size 8 for dresses. And it tells me that if I have my bust, waist, and hips, which I'm a 38, 30, 40, that says that I'm a size 16. So did I grab the size 16 pattern? It's usually 16 is the plus size up to 22. Did I grab that? No, I did not, because these never fit me right. So anyway, I was looking at this a little bit closer. So normally I cut out the 14 and then gather in at the waist or different areas where it might be too big. So this one here for the size, it has this other section which says finished garment measurements. And it says that a 39 bust, which would be 1 inch bigger than my current bust, would be a size 14, and a 37 would be a 12 inch. So I'm going to make the size 14. That gives me an inch of ease in the bust, and my fabric is a stretch. So we'll see what that looks like. I have a feeling that the 14 will fit perfectly, but I'll have to measure my waist. So with that, let's cut this out. The first thing I came up across when picking out the pattern pieces, usually there's 2 different dresses, or like one with a short sleeve, with long, or something like that. You have to pick and choose which pattern pieces you're going to use, but it turns out that A and B are identical except for the trim on this green dress here, which is A. And then there's also a belt as an accessory. So, you know, whatever. So I anticipated cutting out all of the pattern pieces because each pattern piece is used in either A or B. However, this one's a little bit different, and I noticed it here. So if you're making this pattern, keep an eye out for it. This one here is one of the sleeves, and you can see that it says cut out for sizes 6, 10, and 14. There are 2 number 10 pattern pieces for the sleeve. So first thing is make sure that you're pulling out the right number. So 6, 10, 14, that's one I want to use. I'm starting to cut these out, and I noticed that on these patterns they now give what your total ease amount is and what the pattern actually measures out to. So even though I have a 30-inch waist and the pattern mentioned that I should be a size 16, this 14 is 32 inches, and if I have a 30, this is of the garment, not of your actual waist. So if I do 14, I should have 2 inches of ease. So that should be plenty. Be good for when I eat too many bagels in a day. So I still fit in there. So I'm going to do the 14. So this is a picture with all the pieces laid out, and this is the last time I ever had to do floor cutting. It was so exciting. I usually like to do a big, large cut around all the pieces. Then I can sit and spend some extra time around doing all the little details. It was really interesting cutting out these pieces too. Normally I'm used to like a bodice and a skirt, but as you can see, there's these really long panels for the front, which is not really common for modern clothes. So kind of fun to work with them. I like using weights from the hardware store to lay down and weigh my paper down so it doesn't move, and I just think it works really well. I use these a lot in the herbarium, my plant lab I work in, also for holding down specimens, so it's kind of got lots of them laying around. I also like to use, I know a lot of people use like chalk, or sometimes they might stitch some of these markers in place. I really like the wax paper and the roller. That's just kind of what I learned on, but I feel like they just get precise, and it's pretty easy to use, and I feel like it's a pretty good time saver. I know that the wax paper is hard to come by these days, I've heard, so I'm still working on some vintage stashes that I inherited from my mom and probably grandma. The first step is to stay stitch this on the back, the round corners so they don't stretch out, and then also this little notched area. It's kind of hard to see on the blue dress. It doesn't look like a notch is there, but you can see it really well on this purple dress. She's got the little notches below her belt. And then here you can see it with the red piping. So they want you to go in and do that on this front piece so that it doesn't stretch out. I'm just doing a very basic stitch on the curves of the necklines. And that just prevents it from stretching so that when you put in the collar later that the pieces won't be stretched out. I've looked at it a little closer and I think it really does want us to go down to this dot here, which I also forgot to mark, so I'm going to mark that. But what I'm going to do is take 5/8 inch seam allowance from here. It says to stitch along the seam, so it would probably make it there. So just going to measure this out, 5/8. You can see it's hitting this 14 dot there. And then 5/8 here on this angle. So there's a 1/2 inch and then a little bit more for that. So there you go, there's your 5/8, and it does line up with that dot. The pattern does say small dot specifically. Here you can see I am now stay stitching the corner of this dart, which I think is probably one of the most important things that you do on this project. So you definitely want there to be some reinforcement in that corner, and it was kind of interesting. I've never made anything like that before. The second thing I'm going to do is to do all the darts throughout the dress. After I complete all these darts, then I'm going to serge the pieces. Here I'm working on the darts, and pretty simple procedure. Altogether there were 4 darts on the back, 2 darts on the front, plus another 6 darts per sleeve, so 12 darts in the sleeve. So working on darts took a long time. And I never backstitch on a dart, I always knot, so that's what you saw there. And of course, ironing. I think darts are really meditative. I always enjoy them. Now we're going to piece everything together. So the first part was to sew the front long panel to the front lower skirt area. And here you can see this is where that little dart comes together. And then after you do that, then you put in the upper bodice piece number 2. And I have to say these patterns are always confusing, so I always end up marking them and like writing which pieces are which. So here you can see where I have to piece it together. And this is what it looked like when it was done with that corner in there. And this is just a reinforced stitch that I'm adding after it was completed. The next part was to attach the skirt panels together and then attach that to the back. And I decided not to show you a picture of that. Making the button placard was actually quite enjoyable. I've never done one of these before. So there's basically 3 parts. One was to make the placard. The second part was to make the little strips for the button loops. And then the third part was to sew the buttons on. The button placard part was very easy. It was just a plain rectangle that you placed behind the dress. Unfortunately, the size of the placard didn't work. So if you followed all the little X's where they're supposed to put in all the buttonholes just perfectly, there actually wasn't any overlap for the edges of the placard. So I ended up, after I made one, engaged it, I made a second one. So this one here was about 1 inch longer than the pattern piece that I used, and that turned out just right. Otherwise, you could see gappage, like where your stomach was, or your chest was, right above and below the button placard. So I didn't want that. The second part was to take the long strips, and I cut them in half because I didn't want to use so much fabric. So I actually made 2 bias strips at half the size. I sewed them into really tiny tubes, and then they had a great tip, which was to take a very sturdy needle and thread. So I used some like denim thread or upholstery thread, and you basically tie it to one end, run the needle through, and then run it all the way through to turn it all the way inside out. So that worked out great. That was a really nice tip to learn. In the past, I might have used maybe like a safety pin to do something. It would not have been strong enough to do this little maneuver. After that, I cut the long strips into 10 pieces, and I placed them where they're supposed to go according to the pattern parts. I pinned it into place very strategically. I did not want these to be just even a little bit off. I wanted them to be very perfect. After I pinned them into place, then I did a running stitch over them, made sure that none of them slipped while I was sewing it, and then I went through and did a final more concrete stitch over that. After the buttons were in place, I placed the placard on top of that, and then the last thing I had to do was sew 10 buttons by hand. Unfortunately, for these style post buttons, you can't use the sewing machine on them like I have for other button projects, but it was very rewarding to finish this, and it looks so good. I really like how the button placard works. Next, I sewed up the sides. I actually didn't put a zipper in, and I sewed up the front of the dress. So now the dress is completely closed. So hindsight, I should have put the interfacing on before serging all the edges. So this ended up being a little bit harder than it should have been. Contrary to what the instructions recommended, I only put interfacing on the lower portions of the fabric. I do not like it when the interfacing detaches from the front and basically ruins the garment after many washes. So here I'm putting the collar in. The interfacing will only be on the lower part of the collar. So this here, I put the double pins in for where that dot is, which will be my stopping point for where I wanted to sew. And this was pretty straightforward. It's really complicated in the sense that you have to visualize like 3D, but if you just follow the steps and just do exactly what you're told, it makes it a lot easier. After sewing that, then I trimmed the edges, and I'm impressed how closely you have to get in order for it to look really, really slick. So here I'm cutting some out, but I probably cut some more out later. So I only put interfacing on the bottom parts of the collar. So I ended up splitting one piece of interfacing. So that collar that I'm holding in my hand will be back side facing, and then I put the button placard interfacing on the back side. So that's the reason it looks kind of funny. The next portion is to attach the lower collar to the upper collar, and there's 2 little parts you have to turn over before you get started. So that's what I'm pointing at here. Then after that, you can attach it. And this is kind of a 3D whirlwind, but you just gotta piece it out just right. So it takes me a little while to visualize where I'm going with it, and then after I got it, I'm good. So here I'm pinning it, and I'm only going to where those dots are on the pattern. So there's definitely a stopping point. So this is the part where it's basically the collar. It's called the collar facing, but it's the second part of the collar not attached to the dress. You can see there where it looks starting to look really good. So that'll be the visible part of the dress that I'm working on. And now I'm attaching the collar, the front to the back part of the collar. I'm working on the top portion here, and I think this is one of my favorite parts. I love doing these really big sews. The little stuff, you don't get to see very much progress, but when you start attaching these big pieces together, it's pretty cool. And I wanted to make sure I had a very, very sharp point, so working through that. This was probably the hardest part, but basically you go into the corner, and then you get just right, and then you pivot. So good luck on that. Just take it slow. Here I'm sewing together the lower portion of the collar, and this part was probably the easier part because it's very broad, and then working through that button placard. Now I have the button placard in there, so there's portions where I'm sewing through a ton of layers. So make sure if you're doing this dress at home, just take it nice and easy, go nice and slow. And of course in fast motion, it's awesome and it looks so easy. But you can see how nice that looks. Nobody got like tangled up in there, so that made me happy. And then of course you got to clip the corners. And if you think you've clipped enough, you probably didn't, so keep clipping. I always like using tweezers or something kind of pointy, but not too pointy, so you don't want to pierce through your fabric. So that's why I'm using the blunt end of that, so that I can piece that together. And I just kind of massage it out, and sometimes to get that last little bit, I'll pick out the corner. You're going to use whatever tools you can get, so I don't recommend scissors. Those are too pointy. It's really hard to get that super, super pointy edge, but I succeeded in 4 points, so I'm very happy about that. All right, so now I'm all done piecing the collar together, and what I'm going to close the collar. So I was very meticulous of where I placed everything, and then I did a top stitch from the back side, which is the outside of the garment, to the inside of the collar, and just did a top stitch. You can see here, but it doesn't really matter too much because nobody actually ever sees this stitch. So I did a really good job, I think, and the reality is nobody's gonna see it. So just a thought after you spend a lot of really good time on it. The last part of the collar is to pin the interfacing to the rest of the dress. And this is a really cool idea. Here you can see I'm just hand sewing that little top nub. But basically you end up turning under the seams from the garment so that they're all tucked in, and then you follow the line of the bodice all the way up. So it's a really pretty, really clean seam on there, and you can see it's all done now. And if you didn't serge the edge, you would just fold that edge under. So I didn't mind if the serged edge is showing on the dress, but yeah, if you don't have a serger, you would just fold those under. And it would fit really well. The sleeve was pretty cool because it had 6 darts, which takes a lot of time to mark and sew in. But there were 3 at the top of the shoulder and then 3 in the at the elbow. And then after putting the darts in, then I sewed up the side of the sleeve. I know that you can put the sleeve on and then sew the inside last in some cases. That's not what I ended up doing here. Just out of habit, I suppose. Then I gathered the top of the sleeve where it meets the shoulder, and I put a running stitch in, and then that way you can just pull one thread and gather it. I really liked how I think that because of the thickness of the fabric, it was pretty cool to see it form. Then I sewed the sleeve to the bodice, and sometimes I do this with a base stitch by hand first, but there was a lot of room, and because of the rigidness of the fabric, it was pretty easy to do with just putting pins in, so not too bad. And because of fit, I ended up doing that twice. The last thing I did was to do a blind hem stitch for the bottom of the sleeve, and this is really relaxing. I always like doing a little tiny bit of hand stitching, but too much I get kind of frustrated, so the sleeves was just the perfect amount of hand sewing for me. Good morning. I am
midway through my dress. I've actually just about finished it. The only thing I haven't done is added a zipper here, but I put in a basting stitch just for fitting, and I am mostly done. So I have some fitting issues as I expected. The first thing, when I measured the pattern to make sure that bust, waist, and hips would fit, they do fit. There isn't much give in the hips. There is maybe an extra inch in the waist, maybe 2, but it fits all right in the waist, and then the chest fits all right too. But it's big in too many other places, so the sleeves are actually quite baggy. They look really kind of frumpy. And they probably wouldn't matter if it was like a crepe or a silk or a rayon. It would drape really nicely, but with the sturdy fabric that I have, it actually, I don't like it. So I'm gonna take in, I already took it in probably about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch already. So I'm gonna do it again and see what I can get away with. The other thing is it's really large right here in between the bust and waist, and so I need to figure out what I'm going to do with that. But the first thing I'm going to do before anything else is adjust the sleeves, the shoulders. So right now you can see my shoulders come here. It's actually 17 inches from shoulder to shoulder. Most of the clothes I wear are 15 inches, and you can see that this isn't very flattering. So I'm going to bring the sleeves up, and I'll have to adjust the sleeve holes. And with that, I'm expecting that this inside part here will have to come in. So I'm going to only do the sleeve, bring the sleeves up first, and then I'll try the dress on and then see how much room I have in here. Then I'll take it in, and then if I need to add a zipper, I will. Right now, I can just pull it over my head. So, and this is a real button placard. I spent a lot of time on it, so I'm okay using this rather than putting a zipper in. Anyway, so that's where I am right now, and I already hemmed the sleeves, so hopefully I won't need to, hopefully they'll still be long enough by the time I bring them up 1 inch. If not, we'll be going to 3/4 like I originally was going to plan on, so.
So I finally finished the dress. I'm so excited. This is what it looks like before it's pressed and washed and everything. What I didn't do, or what I had intended to do, was leave, not put a collar in at all and have it basically like that. But I decided to just, you know, be good and follow the pattern just as is. So I put it all in blue, which is great. And then, not typical for World War II ration times, because double collars weren't allowed during that time in the 40s. But later, when rations were not a problem, double collars became very popular. So I thought it'd be fun to do just a white collar right on top of this, and that way I still have that Agent Carter look, and I can switch them out. I'm hoping to do like a floral one and some different colors. So anyway, so I have this white cotton sateen stretch I'm going to use. It is a little bit on the thicker side, so I've got that and some interfacing, and then I am going to use the front facing collar part. I'm going to trim this button placard off. I don't need that. And then I have the collar piece here. So that's the 2 pieces I'm gonna use. And then the way the front facing goes on the inside, I don't know if you can see it, but the front facing goes up to here, and then it's absent between the collar here. And then the facing picks up again right here. So I think I'm going to bring this collar down to that one, about 1 inch, so that it's flush the whole way. And then I'm gonna put some snaps or buttons or Velcro or something so that they stay in place and my collar doesn't move. So that's the plan. So I used in this picture, you can see that I used the existing upper collar. I did plan on having this like lower stump, that missing part, added.
And I ended up putting it on the wrong side. So this is just proof that everything you see on video is not perfect. We make plenty of mistakes. So I ended up cutting that off in a later part. Here I'm cutting out the lower collar. I used the interfacing pattern and I made 4 of these. So 2 sides, top and bottom. And I didn't cut all the way down into the button placard because I didn't need that. So I basically just did the upper portion of this. And because I'm not convinced on sizing, I never like to cut my patterns out. So that's the reason why I use that tracing paper, and that way it's like super precise. Here I've got the interfacing, and I used 2 pieces of interfacing, so 1 interfacing per side. And then of course I had the 4 pieces of white fabric for the lower collar. Because the fabric was so thick, I did not want to use 4 pieces of interfacing for each piece. Here I'm doing the very outside edge of the upper collar. You can see by this time I had cut off that little stump that I put on, and I ended up making a little, I pieced it together after all was said and done. So here I'm rounding the corner for a nice good sharp point. And I only went to that little dot on the pattern piece, so I didn't go all the way down. And here I'm working on the lower collar. I basically kind of made like a little pillow. I turned it inside out, and so that way it would be completely encased and look good. Here I'm attaching the lower collar to the upper collar. This part is always hard, trying to work on the 3D portions. Here is what it looks like all sewn up. And then I just had to turn it inside out, and then I would just be just about done. I trimmed a lot of corners. Like right when you think you've trimmed enough, you need to go back and do some more. Normally I would like maybe hand stitch some of these things, but I ended up doing most of this, most of the edge, because it would be hidden under the dress with a top stitch. So that was pretty nice. And then of course here's the final. You can see where I pieced in that little, the collar base, where I ended up piecing that in.